Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? So there's a question that's actually been circulating a lot more recently on my Facebook and my Instagram and all that junk about how do I recycle my clay. I've technically already made a video about that quite some time ago, but it's kind of cringy and it's really old and the audio quality was bad and the video was bad. So we're just gonna delete that video after I release this one. Here's what I think happened if I had to make an educated guess. I think everyone who went into quarantine at the time of the beer sickness was kind of left with the amount of clay that they started that off with. So unless you had the foresight to go get you a bunch of clay right when you thought everyone was gonna go into lockdown, you were kind of just stuck with the amount of clay that you had already. Some of these people didn't know how to recycle a lot of their clay. So I think in the midst of all this question's being asked a lot more, and I'm here to tell you that it's actually extremely easy. So in today's video, I'm gonna go over all of the steps that I do to recycle my clay. You don't need anything fancy, you don't need a pug mill, you don't need anything super duper expensive. You really just need like 3 items. Thing number 1 that you're gonna need some plaster. The reason that many of us use plaster is because it's extremely absorbent and it's also extremely easy to make. You can go to Home Depot, get yourself like 4 wood blocks, make sure they're really tight together, pour some plaster mix that you can easily buy from Home Depot in with some water, and it'll just sit like this. It's extremely easy to make. I didn't make this one myself, this was a gift for me, but I have made plaster before and it's very, very easy. But if you're someone who doesn't want to make plaster, concrete and wood, like this, works as well. In fact, for quite some time, I didn't even have this plaster block until it was gifted to me. So I just used the regular concrete on the inside of my garage. It worked out just fine. The main key is that you need something absorbent to soak up all the water in your clay body so it dries out well, which is why I like to use plaster. Just as a little warning, there's inevitably going to be the guy in the comments below who's going to be like, oh, be careful when you use plaster because it might chip off and get stuck in your clay and explode in the kiln. Although I've heard this all throughout my ceramic art career, I've literally never had this happen to me in my entire life. This is some kind of like weird potter's tale that everyone tells each other, but it's literally never happened to me, and I find that plaster absorbs water way better than wood and way better than concrete. But the main key to this is that you need some type of porous and strong substance to not only wedge on, but also to absorb the water in the clay body. The second thing you're going to need is a bucket. Now, a bucket is super easy to find. Again, I got this at Home Depot. It was like $3 and it even came with a lid. And the third thing you're going to need is a whisk. You can use a power drill if you want. I don't mind that. I prefer using a whisk. So a lot of people will just go buy themselves a drill, get themselves one of these extensions right here, and they'll mix glaze and slip and everything with this. The main key is that you need something to mix up your water and your clay together. And those are pretty much the 3 things that you're going to need for this entire video. This is seriously the only 3 things you need to recycle your clay. You need something of an absorbent surface, I like to use plaster. You need a bucket to hold your clay, your water, which would be your slip and would turn into clay later on, inside of. It's like $3 at Home Depot. And you need something to mix it with. A whisk does just fine, but if you like to use power drills, hey, I'm not gonna stop you, it's a free country. So here's what I do with these 3 items. I'm literally going to take you through the entire process of how I use these items from start to finish. It's a very short and actually it's a pretty rewarding process. There's something in potter culture that is like a little bit respectable about recycling your own clay. I don't know why. It doesn't really have any like functionality other than honestly saving you a lot of money on clay and time and gas of going to the store. But for some reason, if you tell other potters like, oh yeah, I recycle my own clay, there's a little bit of like, oh, you're a real one. Firstly, I put this bucket right next to my wheel that I'm throwing on. I call this bucket my slip bucket because after a while I'm gonna mix clay and water in here and it's technically gonna be making slip. I'll trim whatever I need to trim and just kind of let the scraps go wherever they want while I'm trimming, as most of us do. When I'm done trimming, I'll take all the little trim scraps of clay that I just got and put them directly into the bucket. Having this bucket of slip around all the time actually comes in handy because whenever I'm making mugs and I need to attach handles or anything of that nature, I pretty much just have enough slip to score and slip everything together. Having this bucket of slip also helps a lot whenever I just have a piece that I don't like or it gets ruined or I mess it up or something of that nature. It's very easy to just tear that piece apart, put it into the slip bucket, and it becomes clay that I can recycle and turn into something else later on. Add just a little bit of water at a time. You don't want it to be too saturated. And start mixing. tip. It actually helps a lot if you let these little clay bits here dry out, because it makes it way easier to kind of homogenize into the water and just become one fluid slip-like substance, but you don't technically have to. It just makes the process go a little bit faster. Because of this, what I usually do is right after I'm done trimming, I'll get all my trim work, put it into this clay bucket and turn it into slip with added water and just mixing it around. But I'll usually let that clay that I just threw and put into this bucket with the water just get saturated with water for about one day. The next day when I come back, it's way easier to mix up. You can make this process go faster, like I said, by just adding like drier clay to it, but you technically don't have to wait for it to dry up. You're just gonna have to do a little bit more mixing. And I'll keep mixing this until it basically becomes the consistency of like kind of thick pudding, just like this. If it's not thick enough, add more clay. If it's too thick, add more water. But the main point is to just have a bucket of slip near you at all times, so that way you can constantly just be adding clay, water, and sooner or later you'll have enough to make yourself some clay. This is technically slip, which you can use for a lot of things in ceramic artwork. We're not going to go over all of it today, but just know that this is basically the stuff that you can make recycled clay out of. After it's all nice and pudding-like, I'll take the bucket and take it to my plaster. As I said before, you can use concrete, you can use wood, you can use plaster, you can use just about anything that's porous and strong enough to absorb a good amount of liquid and water. But now, I'll just take that slip and pour it directly over my plaster. Because this slip is on super absorbent plaster, it's going to dry up, especially on the bottom layer. I'm going to flip it over, I'm going to let it dry for maybe another half a day, and then it's going to turn into this right here. This is clay that I actually recycled yesterday. It's still a little bit wet, and yes, I have to wedge it a little bit more because that kind of is the nature of recycled clay bodies, but this is pretty much about 3 or 4 pounds of brand new recycled clay. I like to think of it kind of like a video game. I've gotten so high level in my craft that each and every time I throw, I can very easily recycle the materials that I just used into more usable materials. It's kind of like a free perk. When you get brand new clay out of a bag from a company, it's already wedged and aerated and compressed for you, and all the clay platelets are aligned and everything's all good to go. They kind of make it super consumer friendly. But this stuff here is recycled. I can technically have 2 or 3 different clay bodies in this. And because of that, I need to wedge this and let this dry out a little bit more than I would normal clay. It just kind of helps with the process of keeping it all together. It's kind of all mushy gushy right now. So we're going to wait about 1 more day, let this bottom layer here of the slip dry out, and then we're going to take it and we're going to flip it over and let that layer dry out. And 5 hours later, we should have clay that's just like this.
Tomorrow.
Okay, it is now the next day, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, this is no longer super wet and sloppy. So now what I'm going to do, since this plaster just dried up the entire underside of this clay body, is I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to flip it right over. And now, instead of this part being dry, the bottom will be dry. In the next 5 hours, I can just roll this up and put it in my bag right here, and it's brand new clay. So let's give it a couple more hours.
6 hours later.
Okay, it's been about 5 hours later, and I can probably, yep, look. Now I can touch it. Now it's solid enough to be considered real clay. Usually at this point I'll just ball it up and leave it out for a little while longer, because even though it's technically still recyclable new clay, it still is a little bit mushy, and because of that I want to wedge it up later, so I'll usually just kind of drop it in this bag right here, leave it alone, and wedge it later. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I just wanted to show you guys how to recycle clay, just because the moment that I decided to recycle my clay, I figured out like, oh, I get back X amount of clay per every bag. And so I can probably safely say each and every time I buy a bag of clay, if you don't recycle your clay but you're still trimming your stuff, as is crafting standard just for me personally, I'm probably getting rid of about 1/5 or 1/6 of the entire bag of clay. So every single bag of clay that you actually buy, you're probably just wasting 1/5 or 1/6 of that clay unless you recycle it. With recycling, you get back the clay that you rightfully bought. Like, you're pretty much just wasting money if you don't recycle your clay. I also wanted to show you guys that I don't have some like fancy pug mill or some fancy mixer. Like, I don't have anything fancy. I literally just went to Home Depot, got some plaster mold, got a bucket, got a whisk, and that's literally all I do. If I really don't want to whisk it, I can get a power drill. Even though it costs money, I don't mind doing the extra manual labor. It's super easy, and there's a bunch of extra benefits you get to having a slip bucket on you or next to you at all times. there's probably a question that's going to arise in the comment section pretty soon, which is, can I mix certain clay bodies together? And you can mix them together as long as the shrinkage rate is close. You should probably check out the shrinkage rate of your clay anyway, to be honest with you. Make sure something's not like 7% shrinkage rate and something else is like 11, and mix it together is probably not a good idea. And you should also probably make sure they're the same cone of clay. So don't mix together cone 5 clay and cone 10 clay and be like, yay, recycled clay. Try and keep all the clay kind of together. But thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I know I made a video on this already, but it had really bad audio and video. It was done on like a camera phone. I didn't like that much. So at least this one is more whittled down. It's way more simplistic. You will literally just need those 3 items. You need a bucket, a whisk, and something to dry it out on. Before I had that little plaster thing that I showed you before, I used the concrete on my garage floor. It worked out fine, even though I had to leave it on there for a little bit longer. A little tip, get like a spatula or something to kind of flip it over, get underneath it. But after one layer dries, flip it over, let it dry, and then you pretty much just have new clay from that point on. Just make sure to wedge it really well, alright? But that does it for me. If you guys like to see any of my artwork, the links are always down below. The Facebook, the Instagram, the brand new website that we have. I'm gonna stock that up pretty soon because when I put stuff on the store, you guys bought out all of the things. I think there's like 7 things left in the entire website store out of the like 50 things I put up there. So I'm gonna be restocking that in a couple weeks. I love your Dirty Potter faces, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week. Plus, I like it when it makes this sound. Oh yeah, you know what that sounds like.